wide assortment of faces, from new friends that I've met online to people that I've flown with to people that I grew up with. And to people I don't know yet. And this is always a shock to me when I come to an event and see people besides blood relation in the audience. It still is a shock to me that I get to do this, and that people are showing up and they're carrying and they're buying my books and enjoying my books. So thank you. This means the world. I'm at the end of my tour. I've got one more event, but I have the day off tomorrow, so this is sort of like a pseudo end. So I'm really excited to be here with you guys, sharing it here in this incredible space. So thank you to everyone at Zibby's and to Zibby for hosting me. We're going to talk about drowning, and I suppose it only seems fitting that I should give sort of the elevator pitch to the book. So Drowning tells the story of the rescue of Flight 1421, a flight from Honolulu to San Francisco that crashes into the ocean 6 minutes after takeoff. The passengers immediately evacuate until an explosion forces those who didn't get out in time to close the doors. It's too late. Plane floods and sinks. There are 12 people trapped inside, including a father and his 11-year-old daughter. So now, their only hope at survival lies with an elite rescue team on the surface, led by her mother, his soon-to-be ex-wife. Dun dun dun. So that's the book. That's the start of the book, at least. And when I was trying to figure out what the book should be, what my second book should be, I only knew kind of two things. One was that it needed to involve planes, and I wanted it to be another massive, epic aviation disaster. And two was that it had to be bigger. I knew that in every capacity, in every regard, it had to be bigger than my first book, Falling. More action, higher stakes, more drama, more heart, more emotion. It just had to be bigger. So I started thinking of other moments on the plane when I was at work. I was a flight attendant for 10 years. Other moments on the plane that, well, freaked me out, that really made me think, there is something there, in the same way that my first book, Falling, the moment that I realized what that story was going to be. So I went back to a moment that I had on a flight from Honolulu to LA, where I was standing in the forward galley, and it was a red eye, because I almost only work red eyes, so it's a red eye queen. And we're working the red eye back to LA, and I'm standing in the forward galley, and I'm looking out the small porthole window in the galley, and I'm looking out at nothing, right? Like, there's nothing out there. There's no city lights, no civilization. There is nothing for miles and hours but water. And of course, my sick puppy brain starts going, what if something goes wrong, right? Like, what if we go down out here? What then? How do they find us? How do they come and get us? How do they save us out here? How do we save ourselves? And that moment of acute realization of just how isolated you are in that moment really freaked me out. And I knew that somewhere in there was a story. So I went back to that moment, and since I knew I had to make everything bigger, I basically said, well, how bad can I make this? What is worst case scenario? What is worst case scenario in this situation, right? And I thought, well, plane goes down, and then it sinks, people trapped inside, and then when it gets down there, it's teetering on the edge of a cliff, where if it falls off, then it falls into the abyss and you're just gone. Yeah, that seems pretty bad. So basically, use that as the starting point, and then just reverse engineered it to the beginning, and then figured out, well, what would the set of circumstances need to be for a plane to go down and have that actually happen, to where it could feasibly actually happen. Can I make this happen? And I was real skeptical at first if I could make it happen. So I started consulting with my phone pilot friends, as I call them, my former colleagues and pilots that I used to fly with, who are generous with my questions when I pitch an idea to them, and they walk me through the feasibility of it. So I would call them and I would say, okay, so if this happens and that happens, then this would happen as a result, right? And then I either say, yeah, that's exactly right, or they'd say, no, because then you could do this and that would solve that. And we would just go back and forth until we figured out what would need to happen in order for that to happen. And I feel like I just want to let people know, because I feel like people need to hear this. I had to work so hard to figure out how to crash this plane. Planes want to stay in the air. They are designed and engineered to stay in the air, and pilots are hardwired to figure out how to keep them there. I kept on having, it was like pulling teeth, I kept on having to be like, I need you to stop giving me the solution. I'm actually trying to make this worse. Stop saving the day. Help me figure out how to crash this plane. Because pilots are not wanting to, they want to figure out how to come up with a solution, and there usually is one, which is why I really had to work hard. And the way I did it was I kind of based it on two major accidents and incidents. The first being the Miracle on the Hudson, which we're all very familiar with, the most famous ditching. And ditching is a emergency landing on water in aviation terms. That's the most famous one in recent memory. And I kind of looked at that incident, which is very fascinating, very interesting to look at what happened there, especially if you start going, well, what if everything didn't go right? Like everything in that situation went right. What if one or two factors were just tweaked? What does it look like then? It's probably not a miracle anymore. So I took that situation, and I also looked at United Flight 232, which was a flight from Denver to Chicago that suffered complete hydraulic failure, which essentially means that the plane was a glider. You've got a wide-body aircraft with several hundred people in it at altitude, which now the pilots have no way of controlling. And that is a fascinating, if you're at all an aviation nerd and geek and want to read about interesting things, I can't recommend that situation enough. It was tragic. A lot of lives were lost, but those pilots managed to navigate that aircraft to an airport and land it, and like half the people on that plane walked off alive. That is a miracle. It is a phenomenal case study, and combining those two and adding in some other factors that my former pilot friends helped me discover, I basically created a perfect storm of how to crash the aircraft. And then once it was on the water, it's a question of, well, how do I make it sink? And then what to do when it's down there. And I realized for that I had to change my mental framework. Because when it's in the air, it's a plane, right? And so then the rest of the story, I'm trying to think in terms of aeronautics. I'm thinking, well, what would the plane do this? And I realized, well, it's a plane in the air. When it's on the water, it's a boat, basically, right? And then once it sinks, it's not a boat, it's a sub. So that's when I started thinking, well, what would you do if there was a submarine that went down? How would you save submariners in a distressed submarine, a DISUB? So then that's when the Navy got involved. When I involved the Navy, they didn't get involved. I made that sound like they called me and were like, we hear you're planning a rescue. No, that's when I contacted them and tried to sound as professional as I could, and in getting the Navy to talk to me about something as crazy as this, and basically they gave me all the information that a curious civilian was allowed to have, and I basically sort of looked at the rest of the book of, well, what would you do to rescue a submarine? I got scuba certified too, because that rescue component, the brunt of the book is underwater, and I got scuba certified because I knew that there was no way that, is anybody here scuba certified? Yeah, it's like unless you've done it, you don't understand how crazy it is to be breathing underwater. Like it's a trip. It's a really crazy thing because it's completely unnatural. And it's also something that's kind of like flying. Like once you're down there and there's safety protocols in place and it feels commonplace and it feels ordinary. But then you realize if something goes wrong, I'm way underwater. I can't breathe down here. This isn't my natural environment. The margin of error is very small there. Same way on a plane. fall asleep, we read our books, we take a nap, we don't, whatever. We're miles up, traveling hundreds of miles an hour. The margin of error is very small. If something goes wrong, there's not many options here. That's the zone where the sick puppy kicks in, and I go, okay, let's make it go wrong? What happens then? So that was kind of like the research that I did to get this story what it needed to be. And then I added in the heart factor. Because once I knew what it was and I started writing, it was like halfway through the first day of actually working on it to where it was like, okay, you know what, set up this whole concept that I just like did all this research and did all this stuff for, that's not sustaining any reader for 300 pages. Who is in this plane? Who are the 12 people that are underneath the water? Because if we don't care about them, no one's going to care about this book. No one's turning pages. No one's going to stay with this story, including myself. So then I had to figure out who are these people, and I decided to center it around one family, one fractured family who has already suffered a tremendous loss that has pulled them apart to the point that they've given up and the parents are separated. And now we've got this new fresh tragedy that they are faced with. And the mom is topside, and the dad and the daughter are down below. And I wanted that sort of parallel track of rescue. We're not just rescuing these 12 people on this plane. We're rescuing this family. Can we rescue these 12 people on this plane? Can we rescue this family? And I looked at, Don Winslow gave me an incredible blurb, which was, it's like Apollo 13 on a plane. And that was actually, or underwater. And that was actually something that I used as quite a bit of a touchstone for this book, because it's such a good model, right? When I think of Apollo 13, I don't think about the vapors going off into space, and I don't think about the explosion and the chaos in that. I think of, Tom Hanks with his thumb going over the moon, right? I think of his son, saying, "Who's at the door?" It's like those moments where it's the family. We want those 3 men back. We want this epic, space shuttle saved. We want them back together. And that's what I use as a model to find the family that is the beating heart of this story. And it's been really wonderful to see people respond to it and really enjoy it. And I know there's a lot of Instagram people here who put up some pretty incredible posts and a lot of good reviews. And I think people are really enjoying these stories and these characters and rooting for these characters, which I love and I'm really proud of, because I was nervous going into this book, if I'm being completely candid and honest. My first book, Falling, was a success. It was a big success. And with that comes expectations. And when I started writing this book, those expectations were a lot to come up against. I just wanted to do justice to a story that the people who had loved me and supported me in my life, and then the new people who had discovered my work and had enjoyed it and said, "I can't wait to read what you read next." Well, it was time to write what I was going to read, what you were going to read next, and that was scary. And I finally had to just change my mental framework to where I told myself that whatever fear I was feeling was nothing in comparison to the obligation that I had to you, the readers who bought my first book and spent time with my first book and gave me the privilege and honor of your time and your energy. So thank you for being the only reason that I was able to write this book, because that was the only way that I could, was knowing that I needed to honor the respect of your time and your privilege. Falling was a ride. Drowning has been a big ride. A couple days ago, it hit the New York Times bestseller. Which is wow. The most insane thing ever that I just can't believe has happened. The process for getting a movie deal for Drowning was quite literally the most insane 6 days of my life. I didn't leave my home. I didn't do anything except stay in my house and be on phone calls and Zoom calls and answer emails and wait and just wait to hear from my agent, who was nonstop on the phone. Like I would call him and he would have 30 seconds and he'd be on the phone with me and I could hear another phone ringing in the background and I'd hear another phone in the other background ringing. He'd give me like a 30-second update and he would say something like, okay, so-and-so is doing this and so-and-so is doing that and I'll call you later and I'll tell you, oh, by the way, Steven Spielberg has your book and he's reading it right now. I would say, I'm going to talk to him tomorrow morning. Okay, I got to go. And then he'd hang up the phone. And I'd just be like standing there with like the phone to my ear, just like, there's two, right? You're talking about some guy like in Ohio, right? Like that's Steven Spielberg, not the. So that whole experience was absolutely surreal and drowning this with Warner Brothers, which I'm so excited about. And yeah, it made the list and now I'm here with this and finishing up my tour and it's all just a wild, wild ride. And I feel like I've talked for a long time and I can continue talking, but I always feel like these things are better when they're Q&A's. So if I want to open it up at all to anything about this, about falling, about anything. If not, I can just keep going. I mean, how long have I been talking? I've never, not that long. Oh, great. Yeah. Fantastic. Does anybody have anything before I just?
Yeah, I just want to ask you, you're writing the screenplay?
I'm writing the screenplay for Falling, yeah.
What is that like? I mean, is it really different than writing a book or how do you do that?
It is so different from writing a book and I found it's really been helpful to my novel writing to think in terms of a screenplay. Because like a screenwriting is all about compression, right? Adapting a book is all about compression. How do you take a 300-page book and bring it down to a 100-page script, right? How do you take a scene that takes 10 pages to tell in a book and turn it into 1 page for a script without losing anything? Without losing any of the information, any of the character background, anything. It's all got to be there, but you only have 1 page to tell it. So how do you do that? It is a high wire act that I have found to be really helpful in understanding what the story is, right? Because like in a script, you don't have the luxury of the real estate of the page, right? You only have so much. So everything that goes on the page has to be warranted. In a book, you can have a little bit more room to sort of have superfluous things, but in a script, everything that's on the page has to be there for a specific reason. And therefore, I find now when I am writing my novels, I've got this like relentless editorial voice that's there now of going like, what is this scene? What are these characters doing? Like, what is this conversation? What is it actually? And if I don't have a good answer for that, then it doesn't make the cut anymore. So it's a really interesting process I found. And I've also found, for me, brevity is not my strong suit. I'm very long-winded and it's something in the editing process of my novels that I always have to deal with and that I just have to edit myself down because I'll just wax romantic and wax on as long as you need to go, and it's just not typically what the story needs. So learning how to use that gear has really helped me just sort of.
So you're editing in your own mind then?
Right. Okay. Right. Because everything in a script is just it's clipped. Everything is just shorter and condensed. Right. And it's also too I find this interesting, like writing 101 is like number 1 rule is show don't tell, right? Don't when you're writing, don't tell the reader what they should know. Show them what these characters are feeling, what these characters are experiencing, what's going on in the story. Don't tell them. That's it. You got to show them. And when you're writing a script, I mean, to be on the nose, it's a moving picture. It's literally everything on the page is only what you can see. In a script, you don't have the benefit of what a character's internal world is, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. It's only what you can see, what the audience is going to see. So it's like taking that idea of show, don't tell, like to the next level, to the next extreme. It's a fascinating process that I've really enjoyed doing, and I'm finding it's fun to toggle back and forth. Yeah. Although people say that it's harder to go from a screenwriter. I'd be curious to know if you start as a screenwriter and then try to like adapt something the other way around into a novel, that's more difficult. But I'm finding it very, very beneficial to what I've been doing.
Could you talk about your writing journey of like how it started? Did you ever take writing classes or read a lot of books?
Sure. I was a voracious reader growing up. I read like I was the kid that when I got in trouble, my parents took my books. I was the kid that hid from my parents in the bathroom. Why they didn't like take me to the doctor? Because I was constantly like in the bathroom with my books. And she's like, "Oh, you're just in the bathroom." No, I was reading. I was just sitting there reading. So I grew up reading. I grew up writing. I would always write little stories just for myself, just fun little stories that I wanted to write. But I didn't study it in college. I studied musical theater in college. And when you get a musical theater degree, the thing you do is you move to New York and you pursue that, in New York. And since we're not talking about what my next Broadway show is, you can assume how well that went. It was not pretty. It was many years of many rejections and a million, survival jobs and closed doors and getting absolutely nowhere. So I left and I moved back home and I moved in with my parents. And then I did the very fun process of being in your mid-20s, living in your childhood bedroom, sleeping in your twin bed, going, what do I do with my life now since I have a degree in musical theater and the whole musical theater community just told me I'm not going to cut it. And that was when my mom suggested that I get a job at the independent bookstore up the street, changing hands. So I did. And that period of time when I worked at Changing Hands, that was to me the first step to where I am right now. Because being in the store, it was like coming home on multiple levels, right? It was the literal coming home, and then it was me coming to terms with the fact that I'm a creative person, and I'm a storyteller, and I'm never not going to be. And it may not look like Broadway in New York, but I'm gonna have to figure out a way for me to be truthful to myself, which is that I'm this. This is me, and there's no other way around that. So I started writing again at night in my bedroom in secret. I didn't tell anybody I was doing it because I felt like I'd already used up like my personal quota of like public creative risk taking. I'd already done the whole in front of my friends and family. I'm pursuing my dreams and I'm going to do it. And then everybody says, how to go. And you have to be like, I'm living upstairs. What do you think? I was embarrassed. And I didn't want to put it out there again that I was taking a risk again. So I didn't tell anybody I was writing. I just did it for myself. And it was there in the bookstore that my dream of being a published writer became a concrete goal. And I used to, when I would shelve books by an author with my last name, I would take my thumb and I would cover their first name and I would pretend that it was my own book. And I knew I would watch authors be here. I would watch events and I would stand in the back of the audience and I would watch them and their events and I would be like, I want up there. I want to do that. That's what I want to do.
And here you are.
And here I am. And at my store at Changing Hands, that was where, I kicked off both of my tours, was there. And it was just all my friends and family. The friends and family who supported me the first time around and said, how'd it go? I could finally stand in front of them again and say, it went okay. Somehow it turned out okay. Not quite like how I envisioned it, but it turned out okay. So when I started writing at the store like that, and then I left the store though to go be a flight attendant because my mom was a flight attendant, my sister was a flight attendant, we called it family business, and when the opportunity came up to fly with Virgin America, I knew I needed to take it, so I went for that. And it was there that I had the idea for Falling, and then I started writing Falling on those red-eye flights in the galley. And again, that's where all the little pieces just somehow started to fall into place. But I didn't study writing, and I didn't know how to write books like this. These are the books that I've always read and loved, but I didn't know how to write one. And that's why my first book took years to write and took 30-some drafts to get right, because I didn't know how to do it. I just did it until I felt like it was what it needed to be. But yeah, so that's my background isn't in writing. But I'm here now.
Thank you. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
First of all, I finished it this morning. It's great, so congratulations on that. You cover a lot of territory in this book that requires your own research and independent knowledge seeking, from engineering, scuba diving, like you talked about, all these different things. Was there an area that you found particularly difficult to grasp as a storyteller, or something that you were surprised at your own adeptness for picking up and being able to bring into the story?
It's a great question. I was intimidated by this story. I almost didn't write this story because I was so intimidated by it, because like I'm a flight attendant with a degree in musical theater. I think it is very safe to say that numbers and math and science and this half of my brain is not like the powerhouse. Like that's not my strong suit. So the idea of this book being sort of math and science and physics and all sorts of stuff that I knew absolutely nothing about really intimidated me. And I think I balanced that by reading and researching and figuring out as much as I could, and then just trying to shut off that part of my voice, that voice in my head that was telling me like, well, you don't do this. You're not good at math. You're not good at science, so you can't do this. I tried to just shut that off and think in terms of like a lot of this stuff that I came up with was literally me just like laying on the floor, staring up at the ceiling and just like envisioning something, and then calling my dad and being like, what is that thing called that when we're hanging things through drywall that we're doing? Oh, a toggle bolt. Like, you know, it was just sort of like trying to let myself not limit myself in that capacity by telling myself that I wasn't able to do these things. And then once I had an idea, then talking to the experts and saying like, this is going to sound stupid and crazy, but is this right? And seeing where I was wrong and where I was right. So kind of like the entire designing of the rescue was very intimidating and very, very daunting, just on the whole, which is like also like half the book. So I feel like you just asked for a very specific question. And I'm like, the whole thing was hard. It was all hard. Yeah.
So when you say the flight crash is 6 minutes after takeoff, was there, when you said you had the idea when you were like 30 whatever thousand feet, is there a reason why it was the six minutes? Was there like any way to go higher? Was that the way to survive? Or
there's definitely a reason that it was 6 minutes after takeoff, and that it's twofold. One, when you're at altitude, like the example I used of United Flight 232, part of the reason that flight was so successful was because they were at altitude. Once you have altitude, you have time and ability to figure things out.
Sure.
When you're that close to the ground, you do not have that luxury. Sully's the perfect example of that. They were directly after takeoff. They tried to climb. They couldn't do it. The first thing that you do in an incident like that, the first thing you do in an incident, if you had something go wrong on the plane, is you climb so that you can have time and options to figure out a solution. So that was one component of the perfect storm that had to take place, is like you have to be at low altitude where you just don't have that many options at your disposal. So that's why I did it. Also, I did it that early because your speed and your height, I mean, the higher you go, the faster you're going, the odds of having a crash that is survivable, a ditching that is survivable, is pretty slim to none. So again, that was part of the like, well, what are the conditions that would need to be necessary? It would have to be directly after, and also too, because I wanted the underwater topography needed to be there to where there would be something shallow enough that a rescue would still be feasible, but not so deep that it wouldn't be possible. And like, if you go anywhere pretty much beyond directly off of the coast of anything, it's just the abyss. There's nothing there. So both of those things kind of dictated why the crash went like that. But that's really what I was doing. Like I was figuring out a checklist of like, at what phase of flight is this going to happen, you know? And so, yeah, it was all a fascinating thing. And the whole like underwater shelf, you know, it's like, well, it's Penguin Bank. And it's just, I was researching like, what islands, what archipelagos, what coasts have, you know, low enough shelves, but that are like lined up right against like an abyss, you know, like, and so I spent all this time researching all this stuff, you know, and I figured out this thing and it was like, wow, there's actually Penguin Bank. It's perfect. And I got this whole thing. And I was sharing this story at an event the other day and doing this. And the person who had asked the question goes, well, it's fiction though. You could have just made something up, right? And it was like a light bulb went off. I was like, that was an option? Yeah, I guess I could have. Dang, I was weeks on that.
Number 3.
God, it's really a light bulb moment. But yeah, so that's why I made it that way. Good question. No one's ever asked that.
You know, it could end up that one of your books get turned into a musical, then you would come full circle.
You know, and at first I would say like, yeah, that doesn't make, but they made Titanic a musical.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it could
so, you know,
happen.
it could happen.
And then you get a role.
Yeah.
Yes, that's not.
That would be like full circle beyond full. We're doing loops at that point. Yeah,
Do you still have your cliff notes on napkins
I do.
piled up?
I do. I have well, yes, okay, yes and no. I have so much material from that period of time, an entire Tupperware thing underneath my bed that's just full of stuff. But also too, I wrote that book, like cobbled together flight after flight, and I look back on that and I go, the first draft of that book, because I would work the red eyes and then I would go to the hotel and then wake up, you know, and I would transfer everything over to my little iPad and keyboard after that, right? Well, and then most of those notes I just trashed. So like the whole like first draft of Falling is like was through hotel trash cans all across the country for a long period of time. I always think back on that and think, I wonder if any cleaning, you know, one of the maids was like emptying the trash and was like, what? What is this? I was wondering about that.
So looking back at those napkins and seeing your original ideas, do you look back now and go, what was I thinking? Or do you look at it and go, yeah, I saw something happening here?
I knew the second that I had the idea for the first book, I knew that was something. I knew. I feel like I've told that story a million times, but has anybody not heard the story of how I came up with Falling?
Go ahead.
You want me to tell it?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm filling time, right? I'm running short, so sure. A red eye from LA to New York. That was my route. That was what I did back and forth. And I was standing at the front of the cabin and I was looking out into the cabin. We were doing a bathroom break. It's a security procedure where the flight attendant stands here and faces the plane and the pilots come in and out of the bathroom. So they're coming in and out of the bathroom. I'm looking into the cabin. Everyone's sitting in their seats, dark, quiet, cold. Everyone's asleep. And I have a thought that their lives, my life, my crewmates' lives, all of our lives are in the hands of the pilots, which is obvious. But it was the first time that I thought of the flip side of that, which is that with that much power and responsibility, how vulnerable does that make the pilots? And I could not shake the thought. And over a couple of days, it kind of solidified into like a concrete scenario. And I was working a different trip with a different set of pilots a few days later. And I just said to the captain that I was flying with, I just threw it out one day and I said, hey, what would you do if, your family was taken and you were told that if you didn't crash the plane, they would be killed? What would you do? And the look on his face, the look on his face terrified me because I knew that he didn't have an answer and I could tell that that terrified him. And that was the moment that I knew that I had the makings of my first book, which became Falling. Yeah. And that's when I started writing that, because it's like, once you have, and I feel like if there's writers here, like you know, when you get struck by lightning and you're just like, that is it. That's what, like I said, I'd been writing this whole time. I'd been coming up with stories this whole time, but you come up with a million excuses to not finish them, to put them down, to not edit them, to not do what needs to be done to get them where they need to go. And that was the first lightning bolt where I was like, this is the story that I will finish and that I will publish. This is that story.
So in terms of drowning, it starts up right with the action. So I wanted to know, is that a conscious choice? What made you do that instead of maybe started with the backstory of this family?
That was a definite deliberate choice. And I actually used a model of Saving Private Ryan, in that the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan, I mean, you know, from the first second of that film, it is just boom, you are on the beaches of Normandy, and it is just 20 straight minutes of the most intense, the stakes are set. And you feel the enormity of World War II, you feel the enormity of what these men are up against, and it is relentless, and everything is set up in those 20 minutes. And we kind of know who these characters are, but we don't get deep into them, but we know them by their faces, we know who the characters that we're following are, but it's just the setup. And then we take a break, and then it goes down to one soldier, right? Like the search for one single soldier. So you've got sort of the totality of what we're up against, and then you bring it down to just what the stakes really are. And so I use that kind of as a model here of, I mean, literally the first sentence of the book, the engine explodes, and we know our main character, we know the engine explodes, we know these people are screwed. And then the next handful of chapters are just setting the stakes and setting the totality and setting the setup for what's going to happen. And then we bring it back and we bring it to one little family. And how do we bring them together? So it was a very deliberate choice, and it was really difficult too, because those first 50-some pages were the first things that I wrote, and then I went back and back and back. Like I edited that first section relentlessly until it was right before I ever went on to the rest of the book, because I knew you had to get it right, and it was hard because it's like, how do you introduce these characters? How do you introduce the setting and the circumstances? How do you get the technical in there without being bogged down by the technical also? It was really, really a chaotic thing to try to wrangle into something that made sense. But I deliberately did that and front loaded all of that setup in the beginning, so that then the rest of the story, we know where the stakes are, we know what's happening, and then we can see topside and at the bottom, and watch those two worlds interact together. And I also did something different with Drowning that I didn't do with Falling. With Falling, once I had that concept, once I knew what the idea for the story was, I started there. I didn't know what was going to happen in that book. I didn't know anything at all. I didn't plot it. I didn't do anything. You know, in writing, there's pantsers and plotters, right? Pantsers are writers who write by the seat of their pants. They don't know the story ahead of time. They don't outline. They just sit down and let the muse speak to them, and then the story comes out. Plotters are writers who plot ahead of time. They outline extensively, and they know exactly what's going to happen before they ever put pen to paper. With Falling, I didn't know the plot. I just knew the concept, and that's the first scene that I wrote. I wrote that the scene in the cockpit where the captain finds out the predicament that his family's in. That was the first scene that I wrote, and then I just wrote the characters in, now their problem. And that book took many years to write and 30-some drafts. With Drowning, I knew I wasn't going to have that luxury. I didn't have that luxury of time, and so I became a plotter. And I did a massive research component, and then I massively outlined extensively before I ever started writing any of it. And shockingly, Drowning took quite a few less drafts to figure out, and was a significantly shorter time frame of writing it. So I think I'm converted. I think I am. I think I'm a plotter from now on. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, you got some real archetypes with the passengers in this, like I would say Andy and Jasmine's character. I'm curious, in both of your books, are there memories you have of specific passengers or crewmates you've flown with or informed the characters that you've written?
Not specific ones, but definitely, like you said, the word archetype. There's definitely, like with my first book especially, people would come to me, flight attendants would come to me and would say, like, oh, I know a Joe. Or I have flown with Big Daddy. Like there's just certain personality traits and types that just sort of, in the same way I feel like most people who aren't crew like know an Andy, and you know these people too. So there, no one is based on any one person in particular, but definitely kinds of people. Andy's such a funny thing. It's like Andy, and I don't want to spoil too much because I'm sure there's people here who haven't read the book. But he's a character that was very peripheral, and he wasn't like a big standout character or something. And like at almost every event and people I talk to, they all bring up Andy. Really, and I think it's because if you haven't read it, he's a real stick in the mud. He's like the guy that's like not on board with making things better, and he's definitely on board with just like being a jerk. And he's wholly unredeemable, and I find it very interesting that people are really latching onto that character. I feel like it's a big like Rorschach test for all of us, that like the just jerk that is wholly unredeemable. People are really like, yeah, Andy. I don't know. It's interesting, but yeah.
What happened with the Steven Spielberg story?
What happened with it? Yeah, he read my book. Like, how insane is that sentence? Steven Spielberg, the guy who has been my like creative lighthouse for my whole life, has read something that I wrote. That is the most insane thing to me on the planet. It ultimately didn't go with Steven Spielberg and went with Warner Brothers, but just knowing that he wrote it is like the most insane thing I can think of. There was another moment where my agent called me, and I begged him for a heads up like this, but he's not great at heads up. And he called one day and he was like, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, in 15 minutes, there's a very good chance that we're going to be on a Zoom with Nicole Kidman." The first thought, we were talking about that. My first thought was, I need to wash my hair. 15 minutes and I have dirty hair.
Is she involved in it?
She's not. It didn't ultimately go with Nicole Kidman either. But she also, I just want to say, was the loveliest, nicest person. It was so nice to, when you meet people, celebrities or something in that capacity, you always hope they sort of live up to the way you have them built in your mind. And she did. She was gracious and lovely and kind, and I was very impressed with her.
Was she looking to produce them?
She was part of all the people who were wanting to put this book out. And it was a crazy experience also. It's like, I know this book backwards, right? Like, I know this story front to back. I told this story the best way that I thought I knew how to tell this story. And it was the most remarkable experience in the world to sit in a room, metaphorical room, with people who are at the top of their industries and what they do, and hear their version of what the best way to tell this story would be. And it was fascinating to see how differently you could tell this for something that I thought, was the best way. And suddenly I'm hearing these pitches and it's like, it's really good. That's actually a really good idea. I should have thought of that. So the whole experience was very humbling and very inspiring. It made me just want to work harder. I literally just wanted to just work harder to keep having opportunities like that, because to be around that kind of creative potential was it was very humbling.
Tori, I was so excited when your first book came out. I was so proud of you. I thought it was pretty amazing. When I bought a couple copies, my partner Kevin is in the back, and I read it first. And I would be at home, and we live in Playa del Rey, so I was able to visualize a lot of your book. I'm like, Kevin, the car chase is going down Westchester Parkway right now. Oh my God, they're over by Dale's. And it was really it was surreal. It was fun. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
And we have Drowning at home. I haven't read it yet. But I want to know, for you, how has life changed? Being a flight attendant at Virgin America is fun, blissful, and a great experience, but your life is on a different trajectory now. Like, what's the biggest change that's happened with you?
Everything has changed. Everything has changed. I went from, flying full time and never being at home to never leaving my home. Part of that was the pandemic, which was a big change for everybody, but everything has changed. I'm living my dream come true. I'm now up on the stage at the events that I wanted to be a part of. The coolest part of it, though, is not feeling everything has changed, but also like I still feel so rooted in where I was. Like, you guys are here. My family and friends are still here. Like, everything is still essentially rooted and they're the same. It's just with these new added blessings and opportunities that I truly don't know how to process. Like, I'm if you would have told me that I'd be sitting in my house getting to write for a living full time and occasionally taking a Zoom call with a full kid in, like, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have known what to make of that. So
And your
everything-
name is on that bookshelf, and you don't have to
I
hide
know.
that. TJ. Your whole name.
It's so weird. I still get a trip every time I go to a bookstore and see a book I wrote. It's not getting old. Like, I don't think it'll ever get old or ever get less novel. It's still, I'm just in surreal disbelief mode. Because everything has changed. Everything has changed. But I don't know, also nothing has changed because it still feels very much right. And maybe that's when you know when things are right, when it's like everything changes, but it still feels authentically where it needs to be. I feel very fortunate for that.
Happy for you.
Thank you.
And sorry the sun's lost.
Well, again, everything has stayed the same. Yes. All my Phoenix Suns. I know. Although it's kind of a nice non-conflict of interest, because if they were in the finals, the Phoenix Suns, the basketball team for Phoenix, diehard fan, and they lost and they were eliminated. But they'd be playing like now, like right now, and it would be a big conflict for me. Because I'd be like, can we speed this event up? I gotta go check the score. And somebody like feed me scores the whole time, so it's kind of nice that way. And the Playa del Rey thing that you said that you lived there and all those things, that's where my crash pad was. My crash pad was in Playa del Rey, and so I spent my whole time in that area. And that's how, on my days off or when I would have to commute in early or stay late, like, that's how I know Dockweiler and all that, because like that was my walk. I would walk down there and I would watch the planes take off, and I would do this, and I would smell the campfire smoke, because of the things. Like, that's how that all informed that whole thing. The Mexican food restaurant that's right there. It's like that was, yeah. So that's why it's all set there.
Familiarity.
Yeah, exactly. And I rented a car a couple times, and I would drive around the neighborhoods. That's what I can show you, the exact house that is the house in the first book, because it's like, that's it. I drove the streets until I found, again, it's fiction. I could have made this up. I don't know why I rented a car and did this. I didn't have to do that. God, the third book will be so much. I'm gonna write it in 6 weeks. Just make the whole thing up. But yeah, that's why it's all.
You can use Pinterest next time. That's what a lot of authors do. They get pictures from there.
Oh, really?
They put it with a vision board.
Okay.
Speaking of books, are you working on that now? Will that also be on a plane? Or can you tell us anything about that?
The third book, I play all my books very close to the vest. I don't really like, it's twofold, right? Because like, it's less scary for me to put. I feel more free to take a creative risk if nobody knows about it but me. It's just me, and I have this sheet canvas that hangs above my desk that has embroidered on it, paper will put up with anything that's put on it. And I remind myself of that constantly when I'm like, oh, this is a stupid paragraph and a stupid sentence, and this is it's like, it's you in the paper right now. Nobody cares. Paper doesn't care at all. Just put the words down, just get it down. And so that sort of mindset is, I'm constantly having to trick myself into feeling comfortable enough to continue to take the risk of putting these sentences down. So that's why I don't really tell people much about what I'm doing. And I also realize too, it's protective of the story. If I had told people what I was writing about with this book, everyone would have had an opinion
Mhm.
instantly.
Yeah.
They would have told me how cool it was, they would have told me how stupid it was, they would have told me how impossible it was, they would have told me how all these things that would have completely colored and tainted the entire story that I needed to find these people and what they are. So I don't tell anybody what I'm working on to protect the story, to protect the characters and the story that I have to figure out on my own. It's also why when I asked that one pilot, what he'd do, and as soon as I realized that there wasn't an answer, there wasn't like a page in the manual, there wasn't a protocol, there wasn't an answer to the question, I never asked another pilot because I wanted to answer it for myself. As soon as I knew it wasn't a thing, I wanted to answer it for myself. So I don't tell very much about what I'm working on. That being said, I will say that I am deep into work on my third book, and I am loving it, and it does involve planes. I don't know that I'll only write aviation action thrillers.
Will we ever get a musical theater?
It's tempting. It's real tempting.
Is there any chance we can get you to sing?
No one has ever asked me that, and I think I'm gonna pass. It's not warm. If I'd have known. No, I warmed up a little. But yeah, so it does involve planes, and it is. I went bigger with drowning, and I'm going bigger. with
Wow.
next one. Yeah.
When do you sleep?
I don't.
Do you sleep?
No,
Okay.
I don't. Yeah, which was really
Wheels are
helpful.
turning
Yeah,
all the
the wheels are turning, and my aviation background really helped with that. I am just coursing with caffeine, like nothing but coffee. We are just nothing but coffee right now, which aviation really preps you for that. So, yeah. But so yes, I'm working on the third book. It will involve planes, and I'm pretty jazzed about it. I'm pretty excited.
So Tori, let me ask you, I read that you submitted Falling many times to different publishers, is that right?
The different agents.
To different agents. And they just said no.
How are they feeling now? Andy?
Someone said recently, they were like, the next book is just a small plane with 41 people on it, right? And that's the 41 agents. No. Yeah, so after I wrote Falling, and once I had edited it to the point that I felt like it was as far as I could take it. Like, this is the best way that I know how to tell this story. Now what? How do I get published? I had no idea. I don't know anybody in publishing. I didn't know what to do. I'd never published a book. I didn't know what to do. So I literally bought a book called The Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published. And I read it and I followed the directions. Step one is get a literary agent, because you can't just go to a publisher and say like, do I have a story for you? You can't do that. You have to have an agent who goes to the publisher and says, do I have a story for you? So in getting an agent, you submit your query letter, right? It's like a one-page letter that says, I'm so and so. This is my idea. This is why you should want to represent me. So I draft up my query letter. I start sending it out with my sample pages and sample chapters, and 41 agents in a row rejected.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 41, that's a lot. But I just admire you that you kept going on, because I know how hard that is on a person, being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, but you just kept doing it.
I just kept doing it. I believed in that story so deeply. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe in what I was doing, but I believed in that story. And I knew that if I could find the right person who could see what I could see, that it could be something. And I believed in that, and that is why I kept going. And I felt those rejections. Every single one of those 41 rejections I felt. And I would say to myself every time I wanted to give up, which is pretty much every time I got a rejection, I would just say, I didn't come this far just to come this far.
So number
Good for
42
you.
is Shane.
That's really
42
something.
is a charm.
And 42 is a charm, 42 is Shane Salerno, the agent that I'm currently with. And I look at those 41 and I'm grateful for them. I hold no ill will. I am very grateful that they got me to my yes that I needed. And I don't think I fully realized at the time that it's not just someone who will say yes and will do what you want them to do. It's someone who believes in you. And that first conversation that we had on the phone, I knew that he got it and that we were on the same page. And it was like I could feel the click, and I could feel that he was what I'd been waiting for and hoping for. So I'm grateful for those 41 projections as much as they hurt.
Yeah.
They got me where I needed to go.
I find it really interesting that you said you almost believe in the story more than yourself, because especially when you were talking about your experiences as a performing artist, getting all of that rejection, and then, I was kind of going to ask you the difference between, the point where you said, maybe this isn't for me on Broadway, and versus when you're receiving all these rejections from agents, and to say, well, maybe it's just I need to take a different route, you could have said that in New York, versus maybe somebody told you maybe this just isn't the life for me, versus receiving the rejection as a writer and saying, no, I still believe in the story. It sounds like believing more in the story at that point, because it sounds like, as a creative, you're maybe you're not self-esteem, but maybe something that's been eroded. It can be gets to your psyche a bit, all that rejection.
Absolutely. And it's something that I've actually been thinking about quite a bit lately, is this idea that I don't regret how my time in New York ended. I don't hold regrets from that time. I know why I left. I know why I did that, and I don't regret it. I do recognize also, though, that I have unfinished business. From that period of time, there's unfinished business for me. And I think that I think that was also a driving force in getting to this point, and that it was like, I'm not having unfinished business again. And I think that was a driving force for me at this point with this book. And I think also too, there was a little bit, you mentioned the story, and that I need to tell the story. It's like, I almost felt an obligation, and maybe that was just a trick that I played on myself to keep going also, in that I wasn't just doing it for me. I was doing it for this story. I believed in that story, and I believed in what it could be. And I just wanted that story out there. And somehow I think that putting that on something else outside of me also helped me keep going, because it didn't feel like I was just doing it for me, even though I was, but I was doing it for the story. Yeah.
But isn't that kind of how you do everything in your life? Everything you do, push. And you do it till it works. And I just think it's so amazing. So proud of you. It's really amazing.
Thank you. I've known Christine since we were in preschool. Thank you.
Yeah. It's just, that's been your personality. That's been the way you did, 6th grade. That's the way you did everything. So I think it only makes sense to where you are. I think people knew it since you were little, that you would be doing something, and you figured out what it is. It's just really I get to come again to your book signing this evening. So
That means, thank you, and that means a lot. And I'm also acutely aware of the fact that all those times that I wanted to quit also, and almost did, I would tell myself I didn't come this far just to come this far. And sometimes that wouldn't, that would almost not cut it. And in those moments, I would lean on my family and my friends and the people who have known me my whole life and have supported me my whole life, and who loved me even when I came back from New York and didn't get what I wanted. And it didn't make a difference to them. I felt like I disappointed them, but they never felt like I disappointed them. And a big part of, oh man. Come on, Christine, you're killing me here. I'm here because my family and my friends and people I've met along the way who have become family and friends have supported me and believed in me. And I think that is the difference, is knowing that big things are possible, and but having that support system is the way that it is possible. And so I thank my friends and my family, and truly, genuinely, all the people from social media and bookstores, and people who have just come out and said, oh, thanks, yeah. Who have said, you know, this is good, you know, keep going, and supported me. Like that's the truth. It takes a village to write a book, you know, that's my name on the cover. It is, I am not the only person that is responsible for that book. It takes a village to write a book, and I am really grateful for all the people that helped me help this get here, because it's a group effort. So yeah, it wasn't really a question, and now I'm just talking and crying. And like, when somebody called my therapist, I feel like it would save us a lot of time, you know.
Yeah.
Tori, do you remember when you first wrote Falling and it came out and you had like, we were on the Where's Waldo tour of Tori books, all in all the layovers, we were running around town looking at every bookstore and every bookshelf in every store across the country, taking pictures and sending you, look at it's on the bookshelf at Target in Renton, Washington, it's on the bookstore and you know, in DC, it's on the bookstore. And we were just like a Where's Waldo tour of Falling for
And
you.
and I so appreciate that, and it really feels like it's like, this isn't my book, this is like our book, and it's been so great to see the aviation community respond like that, especially
It was
my,
exciting. It
Yeah.
was so exciting.
especially my family members that I worked with at Virgin America. You know, I mean, it's huge, but just in general, people, you know, the whole industry has really responded so warmly and so positively to these books, and I'm just so grateful. Yeah.
Thank you today.
And we have copies of both Drowning and Falling at the front desk here. Katrina and Jenny can help you all out. And we have them sign.
Thank you guys so much for
Thank
coming.
you.